I alternate when I'm writing. I do a book for the grown-ups, then I do one for kids, and so I get to hear both of it. I mean, I've had one of the grown-up books banned in the Texas prison system, which was hilarious because it was a book about bass fishing, and I mean, I found great humor in that, but I don't find any of this funny, especially with the breadth of literature available now for young readers. It was nothing like that when I was growing up, and you've got the tremendously talented writers, and you also have a handful of self-deputized vigilantes that want to take the books away.
Your new book, Wrecker, takes readers to modern-day Key West, Florida, and the 15-year-old protagonist, Wrecker, romanticizes his family's history of shipwreck salvaging, loves exploring on the water. What was the inspiration behind this story?
Well, I mean, I grew up in South Florida, and I used to go to the Keys quite a bit, and I still do, and Key West was always a place that I'd wanted to set a novel because it's the literal end of the road. U.S. Highway number 1 literally ends in Key West at mile marker 0. And I just thought it's kind of a small island, maybe 4 miles total, but all you need is a boat or a bicycle to have a great childhood growing up there. I mean, and I always wondered about what it would be like, and I'd love to sort of set a book, on that premise. And so that's what it was a great excuse for me to go out in Key West a bit,
Well, there have been a couple of events on your book tour canceled because of complaints about the book's content. What challenges are you facing so far on tour?
Well, these were, I think, 3 separate events. And when you're on a tour with a book for kids, you do a lot of events at schools, and public schools and private schools. So these were public school events. One was in North Carolina, one was in Georgia, and I think one was in Virginia. And they don't always have to give you the reason, but it's clear that a lot of the school boards in some communities have been intimidated by the people who show up, some of whom are parents and some of whom are not, but usually just a handful or less. And I think that's what happened. In the case of my book, I shouldn't have laughed, but when they told me one of them was a problem because the main character, Wrecker, in the book, and he's a young kid, and he's worried about his mother. This takes place during sort of a little past the midpoint of the pandemic, so he's worried about his mom and his stepdad, neither of whom have been, vaccinated or wear masks. And the COVID ravaged the Keys. And a lot of people ended up on ventilators in Miami hospitals, and so it was a very real thing that was going on there. It's natural for someone to be concerned about their mom and their stepdad, and there were a couple discussions about when you're going to get vaccinated. I'm worried about you. And his stepdad eventually ends up in an ICU unit in Miami, which happened, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. But so that was one objection, that they thought the pro-vaccine message would offend people, would offend children. And the other ones, I'm not clear, but it was sort of along similar lines. Jen, they can make up any excuse they want. There's a part of this book the book takes place in 2021, but there's a generational connection to a terrible event that took place in 1921 in Key West, where a man was hanged by the Ku Klux Klan. And that could also be a through to some of the objections, because as you, at least in Florida, we have a governor and a legislature that really wants to limit the way Black history is taught.
And you're talking there about Manuel Cabeza. Tell us more about that story.
Well, I'd heard of this story. It's shocking. The Klan was very strong in Key West, which I didn't know, in the early 20s. The whole power structure was Klansmen, the sheriff, the police chief, several judges, the tax collector was even a Klansman. And Manuel Cabeza was a World War I veteran. He returned to Key West, and he was living with a woman of mixed race. And they took him out. One night, they dragged him from his apartment. They took him out of town, and they tarred and feathered him and beat him and broke several bones, and gave him an ultimatum. Either the woman would have to leave or he would have to leave. Well, he became enraged, and even though he was badly hurt, the next day he went out on the street, and he had recognized one of the Klansmen. It was a small town, and he shot one of the Klansmen that had beaten him up and tarred and feathered him. he was taken into custody, and the Marines were called in to surround the jail because the Klansmen said they were going to kill him. And at midnight, the sheriff sent all the Marines and all the deputies home, and the Klansmen grabbed him and shot him, beat him up, tied him to the bumper of a car, and dragged him around the streets of Key West, and then ultimately hung him. It's almost surreal to think of that in the context of the way Key West is today and the way it's been since my whole lifetime. To even imagine that something, it is one of the most tolerant, free-spirited, non-judgmental places you'll ever find. So it was for me an eye-opener that had happened, and one of the characters has generational connection to that event, and I suspect that there'll be a few school districts in Florida that will find that as a reason not to carry the book. I don't know that for a fact, but I'd be willing to bet on it.
Well, nearly 100 years after his murder, the city of Key West honored Cabeza's life in a memorial service that included members of his family. Reporter Nan Klinninger covered the event for NPR member station WLRN.
City Commissioner Clayton Lopez spoke at the service.
Remember, Manuel Cabeza lived with conviction. Manuel Cabeza lived with confidence. Manuel Cabeza lived with passion.
Fellow City Commissioner Sam Kaufman addressed Cabeza's family.
Today is a day of redemption for us, not only for your family, but it is for our entire community.
Cabeza now has a military headstone. His 99-year-old niece was given a flag in honor of his service.
Carl, roughly 300 titles were taken out of Florida schools last year alone, and several of those books cover important parts of the state's history, even the difficult parts. What responsibility, if any, do you feel to write about these chapters of the state's history?
Well, I mean, I'd started working on this book before this new wave of book banning, or the purge is more what I would call it. So, and I went in there knowing, I mean, I knew what I was going to put in the book, and I knew what the climate had changed politically. Not at the grassroots level, not with the kids who read, and not with the librarians, but the school boards, because they're elected, we're getting, terrorized, basically. Excuse me. And I mean, the responsibility is to write to write what's true and honest, and not back down, and stand up when this sort of thing happens. One of the sad things, and this just hasn't happened to me, it's happened to a lot of writers, but when you have events, and you're on a tour, you're going to usually independent bookstores, or even Barnes and Noble stores, and it's a big deal for them to have an author in, and they sell a lot of books, and they get punished on the bottom line when these events are canceled. I mean, I just get on a plane, go to the next city, but the big part of their budget, and it's a big deal for them to have authors come. I felt bad for them. I feel bad for the kids.
Well, let's pause here. We're talking to author Carl Hiasan. His newest young adult book, Wrecker, is available now. Coming up, we meet a 16-year-old Floridian who started her own banned book club. I'm Jen White. This is 1A from WAMU at NPR.